I'm ready.
Okay, with Daron Hagen, who's the director of 910 Love Before the Fall. Really kind of cool film. It's obviously a tribute to the 9/11 the next day. And it's funny because when I first saw your film, my birthday is September 10th. So it's like, oh, you're making a
Oh
film
my
about me.
goodness. In a way, yes.
Yeah. So, but of course, it's like that. I obviously remember that day, like, like it was yesterday. And it's like you're kind of giving musical tribute. So I'm curious about the seed of the idea. Like you wrote the script. Did you write? You were the composer as well, correct?
Yes. Yes. All of the script, the screenplay, the musical score, everything was written simultaneously, so that every visual idea has a corresponding musical idea, and the idea aesthetically is to conceal that, so that you just think that you're watching a nice film, but in fact, what you're watching is something new. Because people try to cut to music, clearly. They try to cut to the action sequences. The composer tries to compose to an action sequence that they've
Mhm.
received. But when the composer initiates words and images simultaneously, it's just got a different sort of sofrito, right? You know, the holy
Yeah.
trinity of sound, image, and words.
So it's to say the least, this is a pretty ambitious film.
Yeah, but we did it on a shoestring.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
small
that's why
budget.
the ambition is there, right? So there's a lot of moving parts, but then you did it on a shoestring.
My old mentor once said that all you need to do great work is a great idea and not enough time. And I would add, and not enough money.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's the you ever heard the good, cheap, and fast theory?
No, but I loved the sound of it.
So
What is it?
basically, you can only get two things. Good, it's still good, cheap, but then if it's good and cheap, it won't be fast. If it's fast and good, it won't be cheap. So it's like that. It's like
Yeah,
the triangle. Like you could only get two out of. So basically, when you're making a film, you're always looking at that triangle. Like you can't get all three. It's like impossible. But you can always try to figure out that kind of cycle.
I think that's wonderful because I've never heard that before, and I just learned from you. In fact, yes, I paid in time because I did the editing myself, and it took me almost a year and a half to edit properly
Yeah.
because yeah, because I had to take time instead of money.
So the big, obviously from the filmmaking standpoint, the big keys are the location itself, because location is part of the character, and obviously your cast, who have to have
Right,
multiple. They have to know how to act, and they also have to know how to sing as well, I guess, right?
right. Yeah, they're all trained singers, but there's a dialectic going on about different kinds of singing. One of them is a rock and roll singer. One of them is a new music specialist. One of them is a music theater specialist, and one of them is an operetta singer. So you have four. The characterization comes through the kind of singer that they are, along with what they do for a living and who they are as people. So those get tied up. That's why the kinds of singing are so very different.
So tell me about the location. Where did you shoot it?
Well, we shot it in Chicago
Okay.
at a wonderful. That stood in for Little Italy. Little Italy obviously was going to be too expensive, but
Plus, it's
Chicago.
small, right? The restaurants are very like you. The shoot a film and
Oh,
restaurant in Little Italy is tough.
well, yeah. This restaurant though was only 33 feet long, 33 by I'd say 27. So it was an enclosed
Okay.
space. And it was, we've shot it small like Cassavetes, so the cameras, obviously you saw it, so the cameras were right in front of people's
Yeah.
faces all the time. And I wanted that sort of feeling of, what is it, that feeling claustrophobia. I wanted that emotional claustrophobia.
Yeah, so it's one of those films where like it's sort of like a film, say from like set in like early 1963, where like the audience is in on something, right? We're like, okay, you're having a good time, but Kennedy's going to get shot in a few months. It's sort
Yes,
of like we know what tomorrow is, but they don't know. Of course, they don't know what tomorrow is. So we're watching it from a different lens.
right. The historical irony helps power the message
Yeah.
because we tap into we tap into sentiment but avoid it. Which, as you always shine the light slightly to the left or the right of the point to keep it off the nose. So that's what keeps us from doing the cliche. That, and it allows us, when you tap into an audience's sentimental vibe, it allows you to go with magical realism because they're prepared to use their imagination to transform this restaurant into, you know, the Bardo, placed between two worlds, or the River Styx, and you're prepared to take the violinist as Charon, the fellow who took people across from the living to the world of the dead, across the River Styx. So I think the slow rollout reveal is obvious to people who read a lot and who are paying attention right at the front end, but slow for people who are sort of a wonderful ideal audience where they realize, as the cast does, that they may be dead.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. Yeah. So that so yeah, so basically, yeah, it's kind of really cool to kind of see that, because when you tell it in the film, right? Like it's you to tell it in the epilogue where like you're showing that it's the day before, it's the on 2001, so everybody knows that it's the generational kind of moment, right? So
and you came up with another one, good one right there when you said generational. It took so long for this idea. I wanted to write the piece immediately after 9/11, but so many films and pieces
yeah.
came out, and I just didn't feel like I had enough distance. But I had the idea immediately, within months. I wanted to do a piece, but I waited 10 years, and then I finally got funding to write the treatment. And the treatment I wrote in half an hour because I was about to miss the deadline for the application for the grant.
Mhm.
And I had been percolating for so long that it was already fully baked, mixing all sorts of metaphors. But
Yeah.
when you say that, it's the sort of thing that is inspired by disaster, or takes time to make, the ultimate filming of it took 3 days, but the writing of it took about 6 years.
So it's the analogy now is that COVID, right? So it's like it's people are like there's no books coming out about it. There's nothing. It's too soon, right? It's like we're still kind of emotionally kind of like coming out of it, even
It's a
though
good
nobody
point.
really talks about it, but it's sort of like, but then in 10 years from now, there's going to be tons of movies about it. There's going to be tons of books about it. It's just because there's going to be that distance, right? So
Well, we shall have processed it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it took me a long time to process it and get far enough away
Yeah.
that I could say something that I could say that other people couldn't say better.
Yeah, because there's a couple movies, like I think the Oliver Stone movie, and there was another one about the Pennsylvania crash, and it was like it was so close. It was just like it's like, do we need to watch this now? It was like even like say Vietnam, right? Even though I was before my time, it's like they didn't start making Vietnam movies until like the late 70s, right? So like
Yeah.
there needs to be distance.
Yeah, there's that horrible no. Woody Allen is absolutely out of favor now, obviously, but remember he said that, what is it? Comedy is tragedy plus time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And I think that all of us, I was living in New York City at the time, and my wife was on the last train out from under the World Trade Center. She was on her way out to Long Island when the first plane hit. So they stopped her train on the bridge, and the conductor told them to look out the window, and she saw the smoke coming from the first hit. And then they locked down the island, and she didn't get back in for 3 or 4 days. But I immediately that afternoon I walked down to Washington Square, and that's where the first responders stopped us all. And I ended up making sandwiches for the Red Cross for the rest of the day, because they put us to work because we wanted to do something.
yeah. So it's obviously very close to you, right? So
Yeah, it was. It absolutely changed my New York. obvious. I don't have any really brilliant insights. All I really have as insights I put into the film, and they're all obliquely made. Yeah, but I was deeply affected.
And this is almost like, I wouldn't call it a love story, but it's a, how would you describe the film, like in terms of like its essence or its thematic?
Well, yeah, I think that you put it very well. It's a love story to the idea of who we were, warts and all, before and what we became after. And it weaves into that also meditation on the idea of the fall, the doctrine of the fall, which is that big Catholic thing that kids are taught in catechism, and the idea of original sin, the idea of, was it of hubris? There's a sort of an Icarus story being told, but I think the central takeaway for me in writing it and then filming it and working on it with these actors who really taught me what it was about was the toll that it took on normal people. I mean,
Yeah,
these are four sort of ordinary people, and we show their extraordinariness. They show, those actors do,
yeah.
uh, through their performances.
So where did you find your cast? Like, where did you find, were you familiar with them before?
I was, yes. Like most people, I have a troupe. It's called the New Mercury Collective, and you can find us online. And it's a sandbox that I've had for about 10 years. That is an assemblage of actors and singers and people in opera and theater and film, with whom I'm simpatico. And so
So
I've made several things with them.
like opera, like you've like you, according to your bio, you basically are a composer, opera. So music is your first kind of love, your first passion. It's your career. When did
Mhm.
you decide to make a film? Like that seems to be like, that's an interesting kind of leap in a sense.
Well, my first film was called Orson Rehearsed, and it was about
I saw
Orson
that movie.
Welles.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad.
yeah,
Thanks.
yeah.
Uh, and that was I began that about 15 years ago, and
Okay.
I got serious about getting it into the can about 10 years ago. So it's only been in the last 2 or 3 years that I put it in my bio even that I'm being a filmmaker, because I have such profound respect for people who have devoted themselves entirely to film the way that I, for so long, I was a wunderkind, so I started writing orchestral works when I was 15, 16 years old. So I always looked at, as sort of arrivistes or poseurs, people would say, "Oh, I'm a composer," or everybody, "You're a writer," and everyone says, "Well, I'm a writer too."
Yeah,
So I didn't want to just say, "Well, I'm a filmmaker too." But I
yeah.
think after about 10 years of application and study and working in the field, I'm developing enough of a toolkit that I can, with some sort of humility, call myself a filmmaker. I make opera films, though. And this film, 910, ends up being the second of three movies, which are called the Bardo trilogy, three films about people in passage between life and death.
I mean, Orson is the first one.
Or so this is the first one, this is the second one, and we just wrapped in Pittsburgh a film called I Hear America Singing, about a mid-career, middle-aged composer who gathers a couple of his oldest friends together to do a backers audition for a revival of the show that made him famous in his 20s. And into this steps a documentary filmmaker who is documenting the process. So as the film is about the documentary being made about this guy's midlife crisis.
Okay.
So at times he talks to the camera, and in the course of it, by the end of it, he ends up saying the stage directions along with his lines. So
Okay.
he's just doing the scenic design. So he even explains, we're either in my head, or this is 40 years ago, or this is happening right now.
Yeah.
And it combined a staged production with a whole performance in an empty theater, and then with a shoot of inserts and other things that would be strictly speaking documentary footage. So it's going to be really interesting and really weird. It would be like an opera doc.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that sounds ridiculous, but see, I'm just still trying to learn. I'm trying to learn what the tempo and the meaning of documentary is.
Well, but it's not. It's like an opera doc. You would think that it's a documentary about an opera singer. It's something. It's something different than that. It's a narrative. It's a narrative film.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but it's an internal narrative. You know, it's the in opera for a long time. When I first emerged in the opera world, I've written 14 operas, and then they get done, and so I've really devoted a lot of 40 years of my life to writing opera. During the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of focus on interior drama, which when you're writing an opera for a 2,000 seat house, interior drama doesn't play all that well because you've got a guy standing in the middle of the stage having this fierce internal drama, and what you're hearing is a performance of a singer with an orchestra in the pit.
Yeah.
But with film, you can go right up there with him. And
Yeah.
the difference between something like this, the three films that I'm working on, and something like watching the Met on HD, or what opera companies persist in trying to do when they put cameras in live performances, is those are documents of live performances.
Yeah.
They're staged for live performance. They may alter the staging a little bit so that their camera work is sexier, but it's not conceived for the camera.
Yeah.
And so you can take that internal drama that I fell in love with in the 80s and early 90s when I first started doing opera, and I can just really focus on that, and
Yeah.
bring that across in the camera. So that's why the four big I am, I want arias in this film in 9:10, the camera's right there. And in fact, the audience, the extras, aren't really extras. They all paid a lot of money to be there, and they all knew that they were briefed. I briefed them before the cameras rolled that this was going to be a live performance, but it was also going to be filmed, and they had to do only one thing: never look at any one of the emplaced cameras or the fellow who was riding the Steadicam.
Yeah.
As long as they never made eye contact with the camera, they were allowed to be as nosy as they wanted to be.
Yeah.
And so there was a verisimilitude, and there was an emotional honesty to how crazy it is to have a woman who fills a 2,000 seat opera house singing 3 feet away from you.
Yeah.
So that craziness altered everyone's reality in a way that I think the film captures. That's what I'm after with opera film, anyways.
So what did you do from a logistical standpoint? What did you do? Like, you had them sing during their shooting. Did you go back and like ADR it? Like, how did you capture the singing for the film?
Yeah, the soundtrack was built up from an assemblage of live orchestra and MIDI. And there's a conversation going on between live orchestra and MIDI. What's real, what's not? So what's alive and what's dead?
Yeah.
And so the singers sang to playback. So so that's why you hear this woman singing on the soundtrack. She's on the radio in the restaurant. So that conceit establishes that my singers will be singing live to playback.
Okay.
So we had lavalier mics on them that isolated them pretty well. So I took away from that, or my sound designer did, 4 really good tracks. And I'd say that 95% of what you hear on the screen was what we got that night.
Yeah.
And I had to go into ADR with my sound man and do ADR for things like where somebody tapped a glass at the same time that a note was happening. There were no vocal disasters that needed to be helped, but there were things where stuff happens. But I wanted that honesty, that live performance honesty and that commitment. There's something, I was good pals with Marnie Nixon the last 10 years of her life. And
Okay.
she was the ghostess with the mostest. And she sang for Natalie Wood and for Kerr and so forth. She was Maria in West Side Story. And she and I used to have really interesting conversations about how Maria looked beautiful. She was anguished, but she sounded as though she was a perfectly poised person in a sound studio in LA
Yeah.
because it was Marnie.
Yeah.
And I loved the original West Side Story soundtrack. Obviously, it's Leonard Bernstein. It's brilliant music, uh, but that disconnect. Even as a kid, I thought she wouldn't sound like that. She's more upset than that,
Yeah. No, it's
and I want
so
to be upset.
but I just want to point out that watch like there's some really great dialogue in your music. Like it's like pulp culture references. Like when is there another opera where someone's singing opera and they say they talk about 90210 and Melrose Place? I think that's a first, isn't it?
I hope so. Well, this what I've always believed, that the characters should generate their music. She sings that 80s MOR, middle of the road music that gives most of us panic attacks. Like, I think of green shag carpeting in the basement, watching TV shows. And that's what the character of Dee Dee, Bibi rather, that's her music. And that's not, I mean, and her character got to decide what kind of music she sang,
Yeah.
not me. And
Okay.
those are her cultural reference points. So whereas the other lady, who is the attorney, she's singing about, the law and about faith and legal issues of
Yeah.
what is truth. And her music is really very high end contemporary classic opera.
Yeah.
She could be late Stravinsky, and the and then her alcoholic boyfriend sings musical theater. He comes in and he's full of beans,
Yeah.
the way that you are. And these are tropes. And Cece, the actress who plays the young singer, she's an actress, and so she thinks about Stephen Sondheim and doing Bus and Truck and stuff like that. And these were basically people I knew back then who were
Gotcha.
lost, and they're composites of people I knew who died the next day.
So you knew people who died in the
Yeah,
towers.
yeah, yeah. Probably half a dozen, personally.
Wow.
And that's why these characters do what they do. And they're also, I took characteristics of living people. For example, my lawyer, back in the 80s, had his office looking over the Statue of Liberty. And that's why the character of the attorney in this movie has his office there, because it could happen.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things from the actors' own lives. They wrote personal essays about their pasts, and I used them. They were very brave and honest, and allowed me to integrate things from their personal narratives
Yeah.
into the characters. So each one sings about things that they know. For instance, the man who plays the chef, he was actually one of my composition students and a trained opera singer, but he sang in a rock band out in San Francisco, and he was a chef out in LA. So when he sings about being a sous chef and all of these things, he's singing things he knows.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer in the whole kind of Stoppard thing, where you use the actors' experiences to flesh out their ownership of what they're doing.
Yeah. So yeah, can I ask before I know I'm spending a lot of time with you, but can I ask, like, how does one like yourself get into opera? Like, what's your origin story? Because I find it fascinating, like
Well,
that.
yeah. Well, when I was in high school, I had great teachers. My older brother was a big opera fan, and he went to
Okay.
college to be an opera singer, and would send back recordings. And of course, saw a lot of musical theater and a couple of operas when I was in high school. But then I was very, very fortunate. I thought when I was a high school senior, I thought maybe I could get lucky and go out to LA and become an arranger, orchestrator, because I didn't have anyone who was in the music world in my family to say anything else. But I, I got to the East Coast instead. I got to a conservatory in Philadelphia, and I just started getting commissions in theater and opera, and my first big success was an opera, and I was good at it. And I had done a lot of theater, a lot of musical theater
Okay.
as a teenager, and since it used all my skills, and it was for me, it's a natural progression then to have moved into film because see, it got also affordable.
Yeah.
You can do with it on your iMac practically everything at a professional level.
Yeah, it's the time for it, I guess, right? So
Yes,
and
sir.
so you're okay. So you're basically you're always into music, I guess. Is that like you didn't obviously you didn't know what you're gonna do when you grew up, quote unquote, but you were always like, did you play instruments? You're always like singing. You're kind of like performing.
I was a pianist. I still
Okay.
am a pianist. I learned concerto repertoire early on so that I could play with orchestras to learn how it felt. But I always played chamber music. I've written a lot of vocal music, and I'm a good collaborative pianist still. Also conducted all of my cast albums coming up. Um, I wanted to be somebody who did everything because just wanted to learn how to do things.
Yeah.
So I was a well trained pianist, a well trained conductor, but I don't conduct anymore because unless it's like a something for 910, I conducted the orchestra for 910 because I wanted to get it exactly the way that I want, and I could do
Yeah.
it faster my way.
Yeah. It's
So yeah, I always played instruments, but to the end of always telling narratives. It's hard to say, what sticks. I just kept getting offers.
no, because you did like without being consciously aware of it, you did the hard work when you're like in your development years. You love
Yeah.
piano. You're like, yeah,
And
and
then I worked off Broadway. I worked on Broadway as a copyist and
yeah,
as an arranger. So I mean, I did all of the jobs,
yeah,
and so I knew how to do it. And at a certain point, you say to yourself, "Well, why not me?"
yeah, yeah,
And I'd learned how to direct. I have a mentor as a director now, but as I learned how to direct by working with 30 or 40 really good directors, stage directors over the years. And I would attend the staging rehearsals of my shows and see them working and see the difference between method and all the other kinds of acting, and understand why singers act the way they do. I mean, there's a very specific reason that singing actors look different than actors who aren't singing, and it's physical. You have to keep the instrument aligned, and it's very you can be method if you're doing musical theater, because if somebody's upset and their voice cracks, everyone buys into that. But in the opera world, there's this fetish of perfect performance, and for perfect performance, you have to look upset but be centered and not upset physically. So it's a very hard road to
yeah. It's
walk.
a contradiction, right? So
Totally.
of emotion. That's amazing. I just like what one last question before what's your opinion of the future of opera?
Um, well, this is a wonderful question. I just spent 10 days in Los Angeles at the World Opera Forum and Opera America convention, and this was discussed at great length.
Yeah,
And uh, I have more, I used to think I knew, and now I mainly have questions. Uh, I, I personally am dedicated to really fleshing out my understanding of and development of what is a nascent, emerging subgenre of opera film. So I've got my work cut out for me over the next few years, and I'm older rather than younger. If I were in my 40s, I'd probably leap at your question and say, I am the future.
Yeah.
But I'm in my 60s now, and I realize that I've got my nugget of something that I need to work over and work through that might help other people figure this out.
Yeah.
But I do think that the integration of technology is everything. It makes it cheaper, and if you opera is getting, you can do enorm. Opera is doesn't have to be enormous. Opera can be in a 35 by 35 foot room, and have gigantic feelings. You can also make very intimate feelings in a gigantic space in front of 5,000 people. They're just different transactions, and both are absolutely relevant to the future of opera. So
So,
it's
but
not much of an answer. I'm sorry, but
no, but it's like, do you still see that it's funny because I'm going to a musical tonight.
mm,
Wicked.
I love Wicked.
You like Wicked?
I
Yeah.
love Wicked. It's terrific.
I know nothing about it. I want to go in knowing nothing about it. So basically, and so that musical theater is, it's, you can see it in the future, right? Like you can see that kind of the mainstream, like you said, like let's do a Back to the Future, let's do Lion King, let's bring in pop culture, right? But like
Absolutely.
you see the future of that. That's not, I don't think that's going anywhere, right?
It's,
It's
I again, if I hadn't had a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, 16-year-old's fully committed to basketball. The 13-year-old uh, digs music theater, and all you have to do is go into a high school and see a high school show
yeah,
and see how a lot of young people are absolutely transformed by the process of doing
yeah,
music theater. They find themselves, and it's a place they can go. So when you give people a place to go, you're the form's going to survive. That's where I'm coming from.
no, I love that answer because it's like I always say, like with the kids, like because I'm going with it's my daughter's birthday today, so basically we're going to see.
Happy birthday.
And she's 8, and she basically like, so it's their first time going to a musical, but it's like, yeah, like what you just said, it's like because you said you have a 16-year-old in basketball. It's the same kind of analogy. They're finding their people. They're not going to be. I'm assuming your 16-year-old is not going to be an NBA superstar, but
No,
they're finding their people. They're finding their place, right? So that's what
right.
theater does. Yeah,
Yes, and to become all exalted, because that's what we always do. Uh, the theater is Plato's cave. We all get together in any theater. We turn the lights down. We look at a place where there's light, and we watch the shadows on the wall, and we
yeah,
tell each other scary stories about the world outside, because we're safe to talk about scary things,
yeah.
and we need that space.
Yeah. So then to finish my point is that, so you see that there with, like, I'm talking about like in terms of commerce, in terms of like industry. Do you see like 20 years from now, do you see like a big opera show, like thousands of people dressing up, going to
Yeah.
see opera? Like
Yeah,
you like
it'll always be. Yeah,
it'll
because
always be
it's
okay. Yeah.
yeah, because politics come and go, but art abides.
Yeah.
And there'll always be that sort of disposable income, and that the drive for high culture. I These industries, like everyone has been saying for 100 years, that the American Symphony Orchestra is dying.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just changing shape. It's changing size based on the available free market. And there are a lot of things that have nothing to do with art that decide these things. And the same goes with opera. The opera is neither living nor dying. It's just changing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something just so there's something so cool about it, right? Just from an audience standpoint, right?
Well,
It's like, yeah,
it is there. I'll tell you, I've never had as intense an experience as I have had
yeah,
being in that room. Because you see me now that we've met, you see I'm in the room.
yeah,
I'm the owner of the restaurant, and I was in that room for the shoot and playing one of the people having dinner.
yeah.
And I've never experienced something so intense as everyone trapped in that little space, hearing these searing personal stories and going through this together. It wedded the technique of film, the intensity of opera, and the honesty of the psychiatrist's couch.
Yeah.
It really is a special place, what we're all looking for, and safe.
And so, just to finish, like basically, there's something like I watched yours with closed captioning, and I suggest people watch your film with closed captioning.
Yeah,
Is your dialogue is operatic dialogue, I guess you could say, is so on tune. Like it gets me emotionally engaged because you're talking about like I brought up Melrose Place, but you're talking about the lawyer and like Greed is Good, Wall Street, and about like his perch where he is, and there's
yeah,
something human about that, right? Where like you're mixing in things that we know, right? The pulp culture kind of reference from the point of view of the singer. Your dialogue is amazing. It's like dare I
thank
say
you.
it's very poetic, and it's like it's like of course when you're watching an opera show, you're just taking in the emotion, and sometimes most of it's not even in the language that I know, but you feel it. But yours is there's another layer to it. I guess what I'm trying to say. I'm just from an audience perspective, right? I'm just like I don't know anything about opera, but it's just like I'm taking in the emotion. I think it's amazing. So
I'm grateful, and I'm very grateful and honored to hear you say that, because that's exactly what I'm trying to do. To find the poetry in the quotidian, to
yeah,
find the poetry in these people, and again, there were ordinary people, and
yeah,
so many ordinary, extraordinary, ordinary people were killed. The personal human tragedy is what remains. What political and historical things happened or were made to happen through propaganda, or through people capitalizing on the tragedy or not, whatever historians say it meant, what all of these epoch driving events have at their core is a human cost.
yeah.
And that's the driver of all great art. And I'm not being all secular humanist here, but I am saying that there is a human drama that we're part of every day, and there's great poetry in it.
Yeah, because because I think from a historical standpoint, it's the macro, right? We're talking about like the bullet points, and your in art is the micro. It's the individual kind of like story, like what really happened from the individual standpoint. So
And the beautiful thing is the micro then implodes and becomes the macro,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
we talk
totally,
about
a
everything.
hundred percent.
It's
That's
a
what
bomb.
that's what great storytelling is, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Hopefully.
All right. Well, I wanted to watch your next film, so when it's done, let me know, and
I will.
we can do another podcast about your trilogy. So I did see your first film, so the Orson Welles, and
Yeah.
well, I'm gonna save a teaser for our next podcast, but I see a thematic that you from the I haven't seen the third film yet, but I just heard the synopsis. But it's like I think it's subconscious on your part what you're doing, but I can save that for the third. I can save that for the third podcast.
Fantastic. I look forward to that.
All right. Thanks, man.
Nice